And if this is your first time giving your mind a little love, I have a few goodies for you. First, don't forget to subscribe so you never miss an episode. And second, sign up for the Morning Mind Love. Think of it like a weekday oracle from your highest self to help you start each day with a positive focus. Plus, you'll get 2 gifts absolutely free: a 30-minute binaural meditation and 30 days of journaling prompts to help you remember who you truly are. So join over 9,000 people and go to mindlove.com to sign up. Welcome to Mind Love, episode 258. Today's episode is all about actionable ways to keep your brain young and healthy.
I like to think of these questions that you could ask yourself to get a sense of your brain age. One is, how are you getting through the day? Are you struggling to remember appointments? Are you struggling to remember to pay a bill, or struggling to remember how to get somewhere that you go quite often? Number 2 is, how's your balance? Your brain is very much in control of your balance, and balance is use it or lose it. And as we get older, as kids, we might be doing more gymnastics or dancing or sports or things like that, anything that improves our balance. As we get older, that can be a lost skill. Another question to ask is, how fast am I walking? And we have all these studies that show how important it is to walk for your brain health. It actually strikingly lowers the risk of dementia by walking about 30 minutes a day. But we also see that people who tend to walk a bit faster, they have a younger looking brain.
Turn up your frequency with Mind Love. Bite-sized brain hacks for seekers, dreamers, and doers. It's time to give your mind a little love with your host, Melissa Monti.
If this is your first time giving your mind a little love, don't forget to hit the subscribe button. Mind love is a habit, and the more you give your mind that love and intention, the better you'll feel about yourself and your life. Plus, it's really a win-win because more subscribers means Mind Love attracts even more amazing guests to bring you their wisdom. So don't forget to subscribe. Today, I'm excited to share a review from One Decor Freak who says, "We all need a little mind love right now. Melissa, your podcast has been so nurturing to me right now. I'm finding so many topics you address with your guests are so relevant right now. Fear, anxiety, gratitude, self-care, and love. Your morning Mind Love emails help me start my day off right. Keep up the amazing work." I think I have a tear in my eye from reading this, so thank you for adding a little light to my day. How old is your brain? What if I told you that that answer doesn't necessarily correlate with your actual age? Does that excite you or scare you? If you already feel older than you are, then this thought might scare you a little. Turns out, our brains have its own aging process, kind of like our skin. We've all seen people who look 40 when they're actually 70, or they look 70 when they're actually 40. We've heard of people whose hearts are youthful even though they're well into retirement. Or their bodies are strong and vibrant when most people their age need assistance with walking. So basically, age really is just a number when it comes to the whole. But the aging of our individual parts can make a huge impact on what's possible for us. The idea of dementia really scares me. I would rather lose all of my limbs than lose my mind. And that's probably because so much of who I am is my mind. Although a big part of spirituality is letting go of who you think you are and connecting with your soul essence. So maybe it's not as bad as I'm thinking it is. But I honestly don't really want to test this theory, do you? Frankly, if I really want to lose my idea of self, I'll just go with plant medicine so that I can come back to me in the morning. Our brain health and our mental health affect every area of our lives. What and who we remember, what we can engage in, how our bodies function, how we relate to people. Our minds are the center of the human experience. But the stats are pretty scary. We think we're moving forward and progressing as a society, but we're actually declining in almost every area of actually being human. Given that it's close to Halloween, let's go over some pretty spooky stats. In 2020, 54 million people worldwide had Alzheimer's disease or other dementias, which is a 144% increase in the last 30 years. In the US, 12 to 18% of adults over the age of 60 suffer from memory loss or cognitive problems. Approximately 1/3 of people in the US who pass away after age 65 will die with some form of dementia. A third! Now let's read some stats about how brain health relates to mental health. Among individuals with dementia, those who had a mental disorder, like anxiety or depression, developed dementia around 5.5 years earlier than those without a mental disorder. The next stats I'm going to read are going to let you know who's more at risk. Anxiety disorders, which is the most common mental illness in the US, affect 18.1% of the US population, which is 40 million adults. So remember, these groups are the ones that statistically develop dementia earlier if it's going to happen. Depression is the number one cause of disability in the world. In the US alone, 16 million people, which is 6.7% of the US population, suffer from depression. But guess what? That's an old stat, and now after lockdowns, that jumped up to over 33%. So from less than 7% to 33% in just 2 years. And now all of these people are slightly more at risk of developing dementia. 52% of all workers are experiencing high levels of stress, mental exhaustion, and burnout. So that's half, over half, which are now more at risk for depression and anxiety, which then become more at risk for dementia. So basically, we are not on a very optimistic trend. But here's the good news. There's actually a ton of things that you can do to greatly decrease your risk of every single one of these things. Dementia, Alzheimer's, mental illness, all of it. The problem is, we have conditioned ourselves to want a quick fix for everything. An Instagram ad for a brain supplement, or an ad for a brain training app. Just 5 minutes a day to a younger brain. Yeah, spoiler, those don't really work that way. So what can you do? That's what we're talking about today. Our guest is Dr. Marc Milstein. He specializes in taking the leading scientific research on health and happiness to empower people to live better. He provides science-based solutions to keep the brain healthy, lower the risk of dementia, boost productivity, and maximize longevity. And his book, The Age-Proof Brain, was just published on Tuesday, October 25th, 2022. So 3 key things we will learn are some questions we can ask ourselves to help get a sense of our own brain age, the surprising and often overlooked factors that age the brain, and 11 key factors to preserving and enhancing brain health. Hiring isn't just about finding someone willing to take the job. I need the right person with the right background who can actually move things forward, which is why I trust Indeed-sponsored jobs. Hiring? Indeed is all you need. Stop struggling to get your job post even seen on other sites. Sponsored jobs boost your post for quality candidates so you can reach the exact people you want faster, and it makes a big difference. According to Indeed data, sponsored jobs posted directly on Indeed are 90% more likely to report a hire than non-sponsored jobs because you reach a bigger pool of quality candidates. If I needed to hire someone for the podcast, I wouldn't want people who just think editing sounds fun. I'd want someone who's edited conversational podcasts for years, gets my style, knows the software. And with Indeed-sponsored jobs, I'd get actual podcast editors who know what they're doing. Plus, you only pay for results. No monthly subscriptions, no long-term contracts. And in the minute I've been talking to you, companies like yours have made 27 hires on Indeed, according to Indeed data worldwide. So spend more time interviewing candidates who check all your boxes. Less stress, less time, more results now with Indeed-sponsored jobs. And listeners of this show will get a $75 sponsored job credit to help get your job the premium status it deserves at Indeed.com/mindlove. Just go to Indeed.com/mindlove right now and support the show by saying you heard about Indeed on this podcast. Indeed.com/mindlove. Terms and conditions apply. Hiring? Do it the right way with Indeed. And now let's welcome Dr. Marc Milstein to the show.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.
So what's your story? How did you come to care about brain health?
Well, there was a couple, I would say, routes to caring about brain health. One was some family history. I had some people in my family who were struggling with their brain health. Also, as I was doing research at UCLA, I was actually in cancer research, and I was part of a team of researchers that was studying breast cancer. And at the time, what was discovered was that what we were investigating involved with breast cancer, a specific protein, was also involved with memory. And it was interesting that something had two different functions in the body, the same protein, depending upon where it was. And it really opened up this idea that things are very much more connected than we thought when it comes to our brain, and that what's happening in one part of the body can impact what's happening in the other part of the body. And brain health has just been, or at that time, it was really exploding in terms of our understanding, and it was just really exciting. And it still is, that we're learning so much about how the brain works. And I think also that we're learning practical, simple things that we can do by understanding our brain, how to make it work better and work better longer.
I think a lot of people believe that, mental decline is just an inevitable part of aging. With all that you've learned, is that something that you believe?
No. So I think that's the big message of hope, is that in the vast majority of cases, we have so much more control and power over our cognitive or our mental health destiny or our brain function than we ever thought. And we clearly now see that through lifestyle factors, that we can keep our brain more youthful, we can keep our memory better, we can just really keep our brain health functioning much longer by these actions we can take.
So to start out, give us a crash course on the brain, how it develops and functions.
Yeah, the way I like to think about it is I like to break it down to 80 billion brain cells. And those 80 billion brain cells are like basically, more stars, more brain cells than stars in the galaxy. That's what we have in our brain. And those 80 billion brain cells, in order for them to function, they have to make connections, and that's our memories and how we move and how we think. So in between those 80 billion brain cells, whenever I mention 80 billion, people always say, well, who counted? Well, it would take a really long time to count to 80 billion. So nobody counted, but we understand it's about 80 billion brain cells with about 100 trillion connections in between them. And those connections are how we think, how we move. And so we want to keep those connections strong. And so we're born actually with pretty much all of our brain cells, but what we gain as we learn things and as we experience the world is these connections. And something that's fascinating is that we actually overconnect our brain in the first few years of life. We call these the synapses. And then as we get a little bit older, before about 8, 9, 10 years old, we start to remove some of those connections and form our personality. So we call this synaptic exuberance, where there's all these connections being made. And then we essentially, like you prune a garden, you prune them away, and then you're left with, a certain amount of connections. And then that's forms kind of who you are and what you're like as you move forward. And then continuing on through the rest of your life, your brain still is developing, making new connections. Most of the development stops around in your 20s in terms of, key functional changes. But we still make new connections for the rest of our lives. And that's why it's so important to keep learning new things and keep growing and keep, communicating, because that's what makes new connections and allows us to understand and see things and change our perspective and grow as humans.
What about the brain's connection with things like the immune system or the heart and the gut? How do those connect?
Yeah, that's really a big message, is that when we think about taking care of our brain, we can easily think that, I just need to do those crossword puzzles or those Sudoku. Those things can be good, but what we really see is that by taking care of our gut and our heart, our metabolism, it's all really connected. And so, for example, just, if we pick one of those, we now know that 2/3 of all the recommendations to lower risk, for example, for Alzheimer's, are really just heart health recommendations. And to put this in perspective, I always like to think of it in, some unique ways that your blood vessels, your veins, if you were to lay them end to end, they would go around the earth more than twice, just yours. And so you have to keep all those vessels and veins healthy, because that's what's the fuel. That's the fuel to the brain, is the oxygen. And if we're not supplying the oxygen to the brain through the heart, if the heart isn't healthy, it's like the pump, the engine, that impacts our ability to think and remember and be productive. So we start to see that if we want to really take care of our brain and keep it healthy day to day and for years to come, we have to have a healthy heart. And what's hopeful about all of this is that we have really good treatments for heart health. And we keep understanding that it's not just the heart, it's our gut, as you mentioned, and it's our metabolism, it's our immune system. So we can pretty much go through each system and find this really amazing connection, that our brain isn't like an isolated island. It's just very much interacting with these other parts of our body.
So basically, when we're born, we have all of our brain cells, and the process of learning is really the connections that are made as we continue to learn and grow and experience the world. And so when you think about a brain that's aging or a brain that's in decline, what's happening? Is it just no longer able to make connections? And does that start because we stopped trying to make connections? What's happening? Is it just no longer able to make connections? And does that start because we stopped trying to make connections?
Yeah, that's a great question. So something to be aware of is that actually starting at the age of 40, our brain starts to shrink. And so if you think of those brain cells, we have to keep them healthy, and I like to say plump and full, they start to shrink. And so starting at the age of 40, we can lose about 5% of our brain mass, the size, the volume, every 10 years. But that doesn't have to happen. We clearly see if people do some key things that they can essentially slow down that process. But if you think about losing the brain cells, we can imagine that can have some devastating impacts on the connectivity or the connections between the brain cells. And then also something that happens is that our brain fills up with waste. Your 3-pound brain makes about 5 pounds of garbage and waste a year, and we have to get rid of it. We have to keep our brain clean for the most part. And so the idea is that we want to, it's not the whole puzzle, but a piece of the puzzle is that we want to make sure that we're emptying out the toxins from our brain. And that's where sleep plays a big role. Our immune system plays a big role. Every night when you go to bed, you can help flush out the toxins by getting a good night's sleep and kind of washing all this trash away and this waste. And so as we age, we want to, two of multiple things to be aware of are keeping our brain full and plump. And the other thing is to think about keeping it kind of clean, keeping it so that it's not building up with this waste and this garbage, so that it's not interfering. So, if you think about waste in between brain cells or toxins, that can interfere with the brain cell's ability to make those new connections. And that's a key part of several aspects of the aging process that we want to be aware of and counteract.
So it sounds like the brain has its own aging process, and that is impacted by our habits, our choices, our lifestyle. So essentially, if you were to dissect somebody's brain, their brain could look a totally different age than their body technically is. What are some of the factors or questions that we can ask ourselves to help get a sense of our brain age based on what we've been doing?
Yeah, what you said is an excellent point, is that we want to think of it that way, that we disconnect our actual age, the number of years we've been on this planet, with how old our brain is. And our brain can be older or younger than our actual age, and we can do things to make it more youthful. And that's critically important. In terms of assessing your own brain age, we don't have to all run and get a brain scan tomorrow. In some cases, that's, of course, warranted, but that doesn't mean that everybody has to go do that. That's not realistic or even necessary. But I like to think of these questions that you could ask yourself to get a sense of your brain age. One is, how are you getting through the day? Are you struggling to remember appointments? Are you struggling to remember to pay a bill, or struggling to remember how to get somewhere that you go quite often? That's something we want to assess. Number 2 is, how's your balance? Your brain is very much in control of your balance, and balance is use it or lose it. And as we get older, as kids, we might be doing more gymnastics or dancing or sports or things like that, anything that improves our balance. As we get older, that can be a lost skill. And so just taking a moment and saying, wait, do I need to do some things to really improve my balance, which is important. Another question to ask is, how fast am I walking? And we have all these studies that show how important it is to walk for your brain health. It actually really strikingly lowers the risk of dementia by walking about 30 minutes a day. But we also see that people who tend to walk a bit faster, they have a younger looking brain when you scan their brain in a brain scan. So don't be afraid to give your walk a little bit of a push or a little bit of an extra intensity. You don't have to power walk all day long, but a little bit of an extra intensity to your walking can be beneficial to the brain. Also, embrace trivia nights. Everything we've ever needed to know essentially is in our phone now. You take it out. Somebody says, "Oh, what was that actor's name?" or "What was that actress's name?" And it's all at our fingertips. But recall, the ability to say, "Wait a second, I have to remember this." So taking your grocery list and turning it over and saying, I'm going to go through the grocery store and try to remember what I need to pick out is something we can practice to keep our brain more youthful and think about what our brain age is. And then the last piece is, how old do you feel? And there's these really surprising studies that show that people who say that they feel younger than their actual age have a younger looking brain. So part of this is mindset and perspective. And I think how we believe this scientifically is that people who feel younger do more youthful things, and that's good for the brain.
Most of the time I feel about 15 years old. So that's good. Finally good news, because usually it's not. But that brings up a good point about the recall. My husband and I are always talking about this because I'll use like Google Maps to go down the street because I want to know if it's going to account for traffic. So I've lost so much of my just navigation skills, whereas he will make a point to go somewhere and not use his map. And he's like, I'm just trying to remember. And I was like, but you made 2 wrong turns. Like, this isn't fun for your passenger. So have you noticed, or have there been any studies around the differences in our brains now that everything is so right at our fingertips with our phones?
Yes, we see it. We see that recall has dropped. So there's good and bad to these things. On one hand, not having to have every piece of information at our fingertips allows us to free up our brain to be more creative and solve problems and think outside the box. That's all great. But having recall and having your ability to remember things is also, as we just said, a use it skill. So we want to keep that, keep some practice there. And, just anecdotally in my own life, I find myself sometimes using Google Maps to go somewhere that I'm like, a couple years ago, I never would have used this. I would have remembered how to go this place. And it's so interesting that you mentioned that it's I've done this where I say, you know what, I need to turn this off. I need to remember how to go to this location without Google Maps, because it's very similar to if you've tried to remember a phone number lately. I mean, we used to remember so many phone numbers, and now it's a challenge because you put it in your phone and your brain throws it away. It lets it go. It says, oh, it's stored somewhere safe. You don't need to remember it. So there is something to be said for, we don't have to start memorizing every phone number, but saying, wait a second, I'm going to practice remembering how to get somewhere, or I'm going to practice remembering a phone number, or if you like the batting order for your favorite baseball team, whatever it is, the actors in a movie, the members of a band, having those little tricks and having fun with it is good to keep that skill sharp.
Yeah, it's like I remember my first phone number that I ever had from 30 years ago. But it took me like a year and a half to memorize my husband's phone number, which is sad.
Yeah, but I know exactly what you're saying. Yeah.
I feel like you mentioned how it frees up space for creativity and to have new ideas and things like that. But if I'm being totally honest with my beliefs, I don't see a whole lot of people doing that. Yes, there's some people, but that requires self-discipline. Most of the time, people are like, well, let me look up that address. And then all of a sudden it's like, oh, notification from Facebook. Oh, down the rabbit hole. And then you don't see them for a couple of hours.
Yeah, it's true. The devices, the apps, the streaming, all of it has been designed by neuroscientists to make it so that it is highly addicting in a way that it's hard to put it down. It's the next episode is starting, the next notification, and that taps into a part of our brain that makes it hard nowadays to be productive. And so, being aware of that and saying, wait a second, exactly what you said, I'm falling down the rabbit hole. This is so enticing that I can't do the things I need to get done or get them done at the highest level that I can do them until I shut this off or put this away or take a break, because we are in our time now working at a point where we have to be aware that it can be challenging to stay focused or to have creative ideas because the things can be stacked against us in these times.
Yeah, there's a reason the word vice is in device, I think.
That's a good one.
But seeing that, a lot of the times when we think about mental decline, we think about people losing their memory. So I kind of want to start with, how does memory work in the first place?
Yeah. So memory is really amazing. And we've learned so much just recently. Essentially, we know that a couple key things to be aware of is that the connections between those brain cells, those 80 billion brain cells, that's where our memories are stored. So when you learn something new, those brain cells reach out and they make a new connection. And then that connection essentially houses the memory. And then the more you practice the thing that you just learned, whether it be a new song on the piano or, something you've learned for work or just something for fun, something related to a sport, when you revisit that memory, you make that connection stronger. And that's why practice, they say, makes perfect or close to perfect. But if you don't practice, that memory physically moves apart. And that's why we get rusty at things. And that's why we forget things. That's part of what happens. And then the other thing to be aware of is that in terms of memory, we filter a lot out. So a lot of the things that we are experiencing in the world, our brain doesn't want to fill up with useless information. So why your brain won't let you remember that phone number that you just mentioned, part of that is that your brain isn't convinced it's important. It knows on some level that it can be stored somewhere else, so it's not going to waste precious connections on that information. And so we have to get over that hurdle sometimes and make the information important enough to our brain for it to remember. And part of that is we know that if we make it more emotional, we make it funny, we make it scary, those are memories that tend to stick easier as opposed to just, like a random password. That's why we are constantly hitting password reset on our computer, because that information our brain figures is not important. Even though it is important, our brain isn't convinced of it. So the key thing is that these 80 billion brain cells, they make these connections. We want to keep those connections strong. We do also, part of having a good memory is letting go, forgetting things. It's okay to forget, especially things that we want to let go of. We just want to be practicing keeping the things we want to keep strong in terms of memory strong. And it's okay to let go and forget things as well. And then one last piece of this puzzle is that when we go to sleep at night, part of what's happening is we make the connection stronger while we sleep. And that's why sleep is so important to memory, because it's the time where our connections are solidified or made stronger.
So fear can actually make you remember something. Is it only if it's remembering a scary incident, like something terrifying happened, so you're never going to forget it? Or can you actually somehow utilize that in memory training? Like write a phone number on the wall, tie yourself to a chair, and cover yourself in spiders.
Yeah, I don't really want to go that far, but the idea is that what your emotions make memories stick. And so there's a line there. So especially, if the memory or the experience is too traumatic, then in some cases that memory is solidified in a way that can be damaging, or it can be blocked out. And we don't completely understand biochemically how that happens, but we do understand that memories are tagged by chemicals in the sense that when you're having an emotion, your brain takes that connection at that synapse and goes, this one's important. And if we think about our survival over, a long time, you think about your ancestors, they had to remember things that were scary or that were dangerous or things that made them laugh, because those things were the things were more important. And so part of this is that when things are surprising or new or different, your brain tends to pay attention. It tends to make the connection more readily. And we see this in terms of focus, that even just new environments tend to allow us to be a little bit more focused, working in a new room, going to a new coffee shop. That's why on vacation, people are like, oh, I had all these new good ideas. There's something for new environments that our brain loves in terms of kind of waking it up, or it's part of this dopamine release in the brain that helps us focus. So yeah, we don't want to go, it's a fine line with emotions, but in terms of going too far. But if you want to remember things, there's something to be said for making it funny, making it silly, rhyming someone's name with something funny or silly. Some people want to go the scary route. That's okay, as long as they're comfortable with it. But emotions are a key part of our memory for sure.
Yeah, I'm a big fan of mnemonic devices. I'm always coming up with weird things. And my husband's like, how did you even make that connection? I'm like, I don't know.
Yeah, those work really well. Like mnemonics, rhymes, music, also locations. So there's all these memory tricks where people kind of put things in different parts of their house and they imagine themselves walking through the house if they want to remember a list. Those are the really powerful parts of our memory. And what's not very powerful is just like, I'm going to remember this. That doesn't really work nearly as well as tapping into those things that we're talking about now.
So for some reason, one of my biggest fears is developing Alzheimer's. I don't know where this fear came from, and I've been working on it, because I also believe that the more I fear something, the more likely it's going to happen, whether or not that is true. But in reading your book, I don't think I ever really realized that Alzheimer's and dementia are not quite the same thing. How do they differ? I don't think I ever really realized that Alzheimer's and dementia are not quite the same thing. How do they differ?
Yeah, so it's understandable to be afraid of these things. They're scary. It is scary to lose our the essence of who we are, and that's why it's so important that we talk about it and we have these conversations. That we're not, a couple of years ago we were saying things like we don't know what we can do, and we don't know if there's anything we can say scientifically that lowers risk. And now we're saying that we do know. We have a lot of evidence, so that really does give us a sense of hope. It's not just all genes. It's a complex mix of things, and many of those things we have some control over. In terms of the difference between Alzheimer's and dementia just is a general term for losing memory, changing of the personality, having trouble making a decision. So basically losing significant cognitive function, brain function, to the point where it's disrupting the ability to get through the day. And there's many causes of dementia. We could think of, accidents, even side effects to medications, deficiencies in vitamins, certain diseases can cause dementia. But Alzheimer's is one specific disease that causes the symptoms of dementia. It's actually the most common specific disease that causes dementia. And it's specific in the way that we can, look at a brain scan. We say, oh, this is what the brain looks like when it has developed Alzheimer's. And so there's quite a bit of nuance there that we're now realizing that just because somebody has, the plaques or the tangles that build up doesn't necessarily mean they're going to develop the memory loss. That also gives us some hope that there's some things that we can do to mitigate and lower some chances to developing symptoms. But the key message is that Alzheimer's is one specific form of dementia. If anyone's having any signs of memory loss, we don't anymore want to say things like, oh, there's nothing we can do, because in many of the cases of dementia, there's things we can do. So we want to identify it, get to the root of it, and seek treatment early.
So it sounds like Alzheimer's can actually be measured in a way, or is it a diagnosis that tends to be diagnosed through like the DSM?
Yeah, so it's diagnosed through multiple factors, and it's done by a neurologist. So it's everything from a brain scan. There's going to be blood tests on the way that are going to be helpful too as well. There are tests that are given in terms of memory tests, cognitive tests, and just an interview. So there isn't just one specific measure of it. There's also spinal fluid that can be checked as well to see for the evidence of these plaque formations. But what we're learning is that it's not as simple as we once thought, and so that it's not just all about the plaques and the tangles that we always hear about. That's a part of what's happening. But what we're learning is that there's these really interesting studies where they take people and they scan their brain and they see that they have what you would think would be the symptoms of dementia based on what their brain looks like. It looks like somebody who has Alzheimer's, but in some cases, those people don't have memory loss. And that brings us back to this idea that it's not just one thing. It's also, how is our heart? How's our gut? How's our immune system? And we believe that it's kind of like the straw that breaks the camel's back. It's multiple factors. And that really is where the hope comes from, that we can say, okay, wait, let's do everything we can to leverage all these multiple factors to lessen risk in many cases, in as many cases as possible.
That's helpful. I know that a lot of us have fears around things that we think that we can't control. So it is really helpful to understand that there are a lot of things that we can do in order to keep our brains young and healthy. Right. But I'm curious first, what are some of the surprising or overlooked factors that age our brain?
Well, one thing is having an overactive immune system. One of your early questions was about that. So what we realize is that the immune system, for example, is something that you want it to be working. And you always hear people say, I want to boost my immune system. But really, we want to balance it. Because if you think of your immune system like an army that's protecting you, what's happening is that it's getting rid of any dangerous viruses or bacteria that could be damaging. But if the immune system overreacts, it can, instead of getting rid of the dangerous foreign items, it can start attacking one's own body. And so we hear about this in terms of rheumatoid arthritis is the immune system attacking the joints, or inflammatory bowel disease is the immune system attacking the gut. What we now know is that the immune system can attack the brain, and it can increase the risk of depression. Imagine the brain being attacked and damaged, and that can be a factor in depression. It's also, we're realizing, a factor in Alzheimer's. And so that's quite surprising that we want to think about really taking care of our immune system, not over boosting it, but not keeping it underactive, but wanting to keep it balanced so that it can get rid of the dangerous things, but not turn on us and start attacking our own body or brain.
So I'm sure there's some people listening that are like, oh my gosh, so if I take too much zinc, can I overboost my immune system? Which also, if anyone's listening, by the way, zinc can deplete your copper. So careful with that one. But what leads to an overactive immune system, or what do we know about that?
Well, so what we're concerned about is the inflammation. And so when the immune system attacks, I like to think of it like a fire, and that fire can release smoke. And so just like think of a fire in the joints or the gut. And what can happen is that if there's a fire, let's say in the gut, because the gut is inflamed, that can send signals, almost like smoke signals, but these are chemicals that get into the bloodstream. They make their way to the brain. And then the brain, there's some immune cells in the brain that get confused. They're like, wait, what's going on? What's going on? And they panic and they start to attack healthy brain cells. So we start to realize that what's happening, in the gut, what's happening in our joints, it can be impacting our brain. And the good news is that we have good treatments for inflammation now. We in the last couple of years, we've made major breakthroughs in our understanding in terms of just lifestyle factors, what we're eating, how we're sleeping, all these lifestyle things that we can do. And if we think of inflammation like a fire, we just want to put that fire out so that we're not spreading these confusing signals to the brain, the immune cells in the brain, that can start attacking or damaging our brain.
Another thing that you bring up in your book is how insulin resistance and diabetes relate to brain aging. And I've never really put those things together. I don't think diabetes, brain, so how are they related, or what do we need to know about that?
Yeah, it's one of the least talked about, but we need to talk about aspects of all of this. We know now that besides your age, the single greatest risk factor for developing Alzheimer's is untreated diabetes. It's right up there at the top of the list. And what we realized is that diabetes and Alzheimer's are actually quite similar. The brain is undergoing metabolism. So it's using sugar. That's the fuel. The brain uses basically oxygen and sugar to run. It's like the gasoline for the brain. And if that's not working correctly, you can imagine that if your brain isn't processing sugar correctly, it's like those brain cells are becoming depleted. They can't make the new connections. They can't find the memories. And so what we realize is that these two conditions that seem so different have a lot in common. They're just happening in different parts of the body. That kind of comes back to the initial theme that we started talking about, is that things that seem different are very connected. And the hopeful news in all of this is that we actually have evidence that shows that if you treat diabetes, if you treat prediabetes and also insulin resistance, that we can protect the brain. And there's actually these really fascinating studies that show that people who have managed diabetes, it's under control, they might have lower risks of Alzheimer's than the general population. If it's not treated, and it's not managed correctly, then their risk goes way up. So we start to realize that metabolism, how we deal with sugar, how we process it, how we use it, is part of our brain health too. It's not just related to our energy and diabetes and insulin resistance. So there's this really strong connection there. But again, we have good treatments for diabetes. We have good medications and lifestyle factors. We want to take advantage of them. It's like another straw we can take off the camel's back.
So another thing that on one hand seems very related, but on the other hand, a lot of people don't really understand how, is mental health and brain health. Because so much of our mental health is emotions, and that's just like a whole body thing. It's not just in our brains. So how does our brain health affect our mental health, like depression or bipolar?
Yeah, that's so important now, more than ever. It's always important. But there's these statistics that I would just describe as jaw-dropping, which are that before the pandemic, 8.5% of the United States, the population, was suffering from depression. Now, about a few months ago, the study came in, it was 33%. So that's shocking. That's not only critically important for our day-to-day wellness, and it's critically important for our overall wellness, but we also see studies that have come out this year that show that people who have untreated depression, for example, they develop dementia about 5 years earlier compared to people who don't have a condition, don't have an underlying issue with depression or anxiety. And so really it's what you said, is that our mental health today, we have to start making this connection, impacts our brain health tomorrow and 5, 10, 20, 30, 40 years from now. And the way that these things are connected is multiple factors. But if we're suffering from anxiety and depression, we might not be sleeping as well. Sleep is when we remove the trash from the brain. It's when we re-energize our brain. If we're suffering from anxiety or depression, we might not be having meaningful social interactions. That's a part of our brain health. We might not be eating properly. We might not be exercising. It's kind of a multiple factorial. And then just biochemically, in terms of what's happening in the brain, is that depression, anxiety can cause upregulation or an immune system response. There's an immune system response if we're having emotions in our head, that impacts our immune system. We see it clearly. If you're nervous, if you're scared, it's okay in a moment to be nervous or scared or be stressed out. That's okay in a moment. But if it's happening all the time or it's too much, we're releasing too much cortisol. And in a moment or in a burst, cortisol is actually really good for your brain. It's okay to have a moment of stress. It's okay to be, want to get things done and have a challenge that you want to tackle. But if that cortisol turns from a drip to like a fire hose, then that key chemical is very damaging to the brain. It's overwhelming, and it can damage brain cells, damage connections, so that we now see that our emotional state, nothing wrong with having emotions, but if they're too much too often, if they're overwhelming, if they're not managed, that can be damaging to our short-term and long-term mental and brain health.
So covering myself in spiders to remember things should not happen often because I'm aging my brain.
Yes. A moment of it is okay if that what works for you. But and it's all how people handle things. So, some people, high amounts of stress are very different to different people. So we want to, this is a part of this is us taking a step back and saying, it's not necessarily the amount of stress, but how am I handling it? And am I taking breaks from it is an important piece of awareness.
So I've got to ask, the people that you work with, the scientists, the brain experts, are they actually surprised that the stats are what they are after the regulations of the pandemic? Because I feel like the moment I found out what the regulations were, I was like, oh my God, this is going to be terrible for people's mental health.
Yeah, I think that it's a good point. I think it depends on who you talk to. There's always different perspectives, but I think just that jump, and in terms of, wow, we need to talk about this. We need to make this part of the conversation. We need to get this information out. I think is where it stands. It's on one hand, as you said, it's not surprising based upon what we've been through the last 2 years. It's understandable on so many levels, but we can't sweep this under the rug.
Yeah, we've made a lot of progress in our ability to talk about mental health, but it doesn't seem like as a society we've made a ton of progress in actually looking out for our mental health and actually setting up our society in a way that really nurtures mental health. The progress that I see is that there's not as much of a stigma in admitting that you struggle or taking a mental health day off. But man, it just seems like maybe it's capitalism. Maybe it's the profits over people that pops up so much in our culture, which is understandable. I mean, we're all on so many levels selfish.
Yeah, it's a complex issue for sure, and I think that it's a process. I mean, I think what you're doing is helpful, very helpful, and very important to talk about this and get this information out. Is very appreciated. And I think that, we've come far, we have a ways to go, and there's natural tendencies that help us as humans and natural tendencies that make this more difficult. But I think that what's good about being a human is that if we're aware of it, we can try to make changes, and from those changes, sometimes little things can have a big impact. But it's a work. I think it's a work in progress. I think it's something to say for sure.
So let's get into some of the actionable solutions to keeping our brains young. But first, I want to talk about what doesn't work. What are some of the false promises or marketing hype that, pop up in those really compelling Instagram ads or whatever?
Yeah.
What doesn't work? What are some of the false promises or marketing hype that, pop up in those really compelling Instagram ads or whatever?
Yeah. There's a lot out there that's hype, marketing over science. A lot of fads, a lot of, the supplements that are advertised on TV. That's probably the most common question I get asked is, probably in the top three is what about that pill that I see advertised on the commercial? Does it work? Unfortunately, no. There's not, the evidence isn't there. A lot of those companies are in quite a bit of trouble for saying things that really aren't backed up. I wish there was some, just simple a pill that we could take and it would all go away. But on the other end, there are things we can do, and a lot of them are fun. A lot of them are things that are like, being social, going out and taking a walk, thinking about eating, minimally processed food, thinking about getting some exercise, being on top of our health. That one might not be in terms of going to the doctor, not be super fun, but just thinking about day-to-day little choices that can have a big impact. Prioritizing our sleep, as you said, taking care of your mental health, making sure that that's a priority, especially in a world where that can be very challenging to do so. Instead of it being one action, it's more of a comprehensive idea or comprehensive steps that we can take. Not to say that everybody has to make major changes. I think that can be overwhelming. It doesn't mean that we all have to, make drastic changes, but even starting somewhere with saying, I'm going to walk more. I'm going to try, 30 minutes a day lowers the risk of dementia. I'm going to really make that part of my day. The studies suggest it doesn't have to all be done at the same time. So that's something that it's one of the multiple things that we can say, I can start that tomorrow. I could start that today. And I can add that in and I can make it part of my day to day.
So it really is. Everything is. I feel like I've always known this, but it's called quackery when you say that like everything's connected. Yeah. Still to this day, when you look up functional medicine on Wikipedia, it only talks about how it's alternative, unproven, disproven quackery pseudoscience. And I'm like, functional medicine is a holistic look at our health. Like, I don't understand what Wikipedia is missing and who let them write this and why do they keep changing it?
Yeah, I'm surprised to hear that. I think that I give a lot of talks to grand rounds to physicians, and I think the reception, the feeling is that this is the future, that this is where we have to go. That as our ideas evolved, that things became hyper specialized, and that has its benefits. But it's true that if we want to take care of our overall health, and we want to if we really want to take care of our brain or our heart, we have to see how these systems interact and they work together, and we can't just have a magic solution for one thing. It's more of a comprehensive functional approach.
Yeah, it actually still says, I just pulled it up. Its proponents claim that it focuses on the root causes of disease based on interactions between environment, gastrointestinal, endocrine, and immune systems to develop individualized treatment plans. It's described as pseudoscience, quackery, and at its essence, a rebranding of complementary and alternative medicine. I get so mad whenever I go to this page. I always check it to see if they've changed it yet. I'm like, but everyone agrees now that everything is connected. Like, why is this still here?
Right.
Clearly the pharmaceutical industry wrote it.
Yeah, that's surprising. I haven't seen that. But that's too bad.
So what about stress? Because everyone's stressed out. How bad is it? What do we need to watch for? How do we know when we are too stressed versus, a healthy amount of stress because we're all human?
Yeah, so that's the key point, is that stress is actually good in bursts and moments. And we want to think of that. We want to embrace some stress. Like, I like to think of it like your brain and body are like a car. If you don't drive it, it falls apart. If you overdrive it, it falls apart. So taking a moment and checking in, and that's where mindfulness has moved from kind of a new age mystical eye-rolling idea to mainstream medicine, where we realize, wait a second, this is one strategy that people can use to check in on their stress levels and just say, how am I feeling? How am I doing? Because we live in a world of a lot of distraction. We're constantly moving from device, as you say, vice to device over and over again. And we can be distracted and not realizing that, we're constantly being hit with the next news story or the next email or the next text. And if we're not aware of it, I like to think of your body or our bodies like a glass, and stress is like the water in it. And there's nothing wrong with having water in the glass, but if it overflows, that's when we're concerned. And sometimes we're not aware that the glass is overflowing because we're so distracted with all the stress that's around us. It just keeps compounding and adding. So being aware and taking moments during the day and saying, I just need to disconnect for a moment, even for a minute here, a minute there, and say, where are my stress levels? How am I feeling? Okay, I'm I'm like a 9 out of 10, I'm a 7 out of 10, or I'm an 11 out of 10, and I need to take a moment and bring these levels back down. Because we clearly see when people do this, they have less incidence of burnout, they feel better later in the day, they feel better tomorrow. I mean, I'm fascinated by athletes, and just watch an athlete. You know, they're on the pitcher's mound, they're in the batter's box. You see the deep breaths, you see the checking in the moment to calm themselves down so they can, succeed in that next moment. And it's just kind of a really good metaphor for life.
Yeah, there's so much we can learn if we just make that check-in a habit. And I do think it is difficult at first because we're not used to doing it. So just the idea of remembering, like, I don't know, use your device to actually set a mindful routine or an alert to remind you to check in. Because so often, if I remember to do that check-in, I don't even realize that I've been like half holding my breath, or I'm clearly stressed about something that happened 20 minutes ago that I can easily let go of if I were just to give it a moment.
Yeah, scheduling time. Schedule time for fun, schedule time for breaks, schedule time, set an alarm that, I need to go do something fun. I need to take a quick break. I need to go for a walk. I need to call a friend. I need to do something to break up that hamster wheel cycle that we can easily fall under, where it's just one more thing, one more task. And then we wonder why at the end of the day, we're frazzled and we feel like I'm having trouble sleeping. And it can be an endless wheel that it's important to step off of a couple times throughout the day.
So I'm sure a lot of people have seen, the Instagram ad about the brain training app that keeps your brain young. And I know you talk about cross-training your brain. I recently read something where it said, all those apps that say that it's keeping your brain young, there's no evidence to actually support that that's working. But on the other hand, you say that practicing little memorization things can. So where do you lie on that? Are they helpful, or is it marketing hype?
It's a piece of the puzzle. So we want to be very careful to say that those apps are the only sole solution. The data on those brain games is essentially that, for the most part, they make you better at the brain games. But we don't see that it really carries over to day-to-day memory. Where we do see benefit is pick something outside of your field of expertise. It could be painting. It could be a new sport. It could be a foreign language, a new musical instrument. That newness, that forging of new connections is really important. It's important to revisit old information if you want to remember it, but the newness of learning new things, new information, a little bit of brain science, whatever it is, a new field of study, that newness is forging and causing the brain to make new connections. As we get older, we tend to lose connections. So if we can keep making new ones, we don't tend to notice the ones we lost nearly as much. And so the idea of cross-training is that it's not all about one activity. So that, people say, you might hear people say, I do crosswords, so I'm good. Well, it's kind of like that'd be like going to the gym and just working out your biceps, your forearms. After a while, that's not going to look so good. So I want to think about, brain movement. So dancing, sports, learning new things just in terms of reading from a book, listening to a podcast. You want to think about music. You want to think about singing. You don't have to do all of these things, but just thinking, throughout the week, I want to cross-train my brain, because each of these activities stimulate different parts of the brain. It's like a full brain workout, as opposed to just focusing on, I'm just going to do this one thing for my brain health or my memory. So memorizing new information, learning new things is a piece of the puzzle, but it shouldn't be the only thing we're doing.
And so what about people that are approaching 40? Me. How do is there anything, is it just kind of a combination of the things that we talked about in order to keep our brain young? Or we kind of talked about the gut brain connection. What should we make sure that we're getting enough of in terms of vitamins or whatever, just so that my poor little brain isn't just withering away?
Yeah. So it's a key message and a key point that I like to think of it like the ocean. It's like you only see the waves when they get close, but if you go past the waves, it seems calm. Even decades before we'd ever see issues of memory issues or significant memory issues, the waves are beneath the surface. Things are happening, decades before. And so it's not a reason to panic or a reason to freak out. It's more of a thing to say, let's do things now. Let's take advantage of this time and these practical things that we can do. So, the big four to focus on at any age, and especially, at ages when we want to be aware of our brain health, are optimizing sleep, really thinking about how do I get the best night's sleep? We've learned so much about how to do that. The second thing is we've talked about stress, really thinking about how am I going to manage my stress day to day. The other thing is thinking about the right types of exercise. What is, we don't want to overdo it. We don't want to underdo it. What is the right amounts of exercise? And also what we're eating. Those are 4 places to really start. And the food that we eat, we clearly see now not only impacts our ability to perform a mental task that hour, but it impacts our brain health down the road. So there's a lot we can do. In the book, I go through essentially 10 to 12 things, but those are 4 places where we can really start with some really actionable, simple things and say, okay, I just want to be on top of those things because they cross over. Like, what you're eating not only helps your brain, it helps your gut, helps your immune system. Oh, my sleep, that helps my brain, that helps my gut, that helps my immune system. So by thinking about those big 4, that's a great place to start.
Well, we have covered a lot, and I personally feel a little bit better about my potential brain health in general. Like I said earlier, a lot of the times it's just when we feel like it's something that may or may not come and we have no control over it. That's when it's really scary. But when we learn that we can do things, we can change our lifestyles, we can add and take away things. And most of the things are fun. A lot of those things aren't just about brain health. It's about the keys to a happy, fulfilling life in general. So thank you for bringing all this information to us. And for listeners that are interested in learning more about you and your book, where is the best place for them to connect?
Oh, well, thank you. It was great talking to you. And my website is a great place to start. Dr. Marc Milstein, Marc with a C. .com. And then I have this book coming out that I'm really excited about that goes into, in depth, what's a game plan? What are things that we can do? What are the things to ask your doctor? What are the tests to be aware of? What are the ways in which little habits can make an impact each day? And that's the book, The Age-Proof Brain, is coming out in October.
All the links for this episode are at mindlove.com/258. Your challenge for this week should be pretty clear. This is a pretty actionable episode, but I know it can be overwhelming when you're thinking about all of these different ways that we need to optimize our brain health. So pick your top 3 that we mentioned that sound fun to you, like a positive addition to your lifestyle, or maybe something that you can just lean a little harder into that you're already doing at some level. So for me, prioritizing the movement, I am really pleased to hear that balance is one of the things that's extra helpful for brain health, because yoga is my favorite form of exercise. And like you said, you don't want to overdo it, you don't want to underdo it. For some reason, the universe keeps delivering me information about overdoing exercise, which is interesting because I don't overdo exercise anymore. But I recently came across the negative impact of things like running marathons, which is kind of sad because it's always been on my bucket list to run one. But apparently there's a lot of downsides. So if it's already a passion of yours, there are always ways to make it work for you and mitigate some of the downsides. But if you're considering a new hobby, maybe consider the things that are a little bit easier on your body. I like to look at things from a holistic perspective, and yoga just has so many positive benefits. I will forever be a yoga advocate. But then also cross-training your brain. That sounds fun to me. Whether you're playing around with a few different apps or you're turning off Google Maps next time you're going somewhere that you vaguely know the directions to. It might feel a little stressful sometimes, but that is one of the positive stresses, the working hard to make connections or to learn something new, to memorize, to play an instrument. I recently downloaded a ukulele app and borrowed a ukulele, and I've been plucking away at it, and it does add a lot of joy. I'm also diving back into playing the piano, and I have an app called Quizlet that I love. Whenever I'm trying to learn new things, I can just easily create a flashcard deck One of the ways I've been using this is for words that I come across that I don't know. I'll just go in my vocabulary flashcard deck and quickly add the word. And the cool thing about this app is you can just add a word in it and it'll automatically pull up the definition. So you don't even have to do that much thinking when you're creating it. And no, they're not a sponsor, but these are just fun ways where you can get creative with the ways that you learn rather than flashing back to high school tests and being re-traumatized. So let me know what you come up with. Let's share some ideas. Reach out to me on Instagram at mindlovemelissa. If you love this episode, please consider sharing it by taking a screenshot and tagging me, mindlovemelissa, and mindlove podcast. I love resharing when you guys share. I love seeing who's listening and how it's impacting you. So please don't hesitate to reach out. It totally lights me up. And you know what else lights me up? 5-star reviews on Apple Podcast and Spotify. Absolutely love them. It's like giving a toddler a lollipop. I'm stoked about it. So if you feel like doing that, just know that whenever you leave a 5-star review for Mind Love, an angel gets its wings. If you'd like to support the show, the best way to do that is by one of those 5-star reviews or by joining Mind Love Premium. You can do that at mindlove.com/premium. You get a whole backlog of over 50 exclusive episodes that are only available for premium members. You get an ad-free listening experience. You also get early release episodes, and you get other bonuses like meditations. You can also support one of my sponsors. I love them. They support me. I'm very picky about who I allow to sponsor this podcast because I only want to share things that I'm actually passionate about, that I actually believe in the mission, the ingredients, and all of that. So you can find all of them at mindlove.com/sponsors. And that's all for today. So thanks for giving your mind a little love today, and I'll see you next time.
Thanks for tuning into Your Higher Frequency with Mind Love. Head to mindlove.com for a free gift to keep your vibes up until next week.